let's see what the news has in store for us this week. Co-pilot first, as always. So here are the top alternative media UK news stories for the past 7 days. So the Daily Skeptic, anti-orthodoxy news roundup. The outlet highlights stories challenging dominant narratives around climate policy, public health and academia. A major item this week is debate over media responsibility following the death of Jason Arday, with commentary arguing that institutional failures, not journalism, are central to the controversy. Now, we brought you the controversy over Mr. Arday last week. Jason Arday, if you remember, we talked about DEI, so diversity, equity and inclusion. And the argument was that he was a DEI hire. And I said that people who aren't able to perform the role that they've been hired for should not be hired under the DEI kind of banner. I wasn't familiar with the case, and at the time Mr. Arday was very much alive. It was just a big controversy because he'd been hired by one of the universities, and the controversy was over perjury. I think it was perjury. Oh no, plagiarism. Sorry, not perjury, plagiarism. And since I brought you that information, Mr. Arday is no longer with us. I'm not sure if he took his own life, as some commentators would say, unalived himself. I'm suggesting that it probably was. I think that might have been what happened. And the Daily Skeptic have obviously, we have a bird that's joined us. The Daily Skeptic has obviously picked up on the fact that it's institutional failures, that they have accused him, and then obviously there hasn't been support in place after the accusation. And yeah, the outcome was tragic. So it's not journalism that's the issue. According to the Daily Skeptic, it's the institutional failures that have led to this problem. Okay, left foot forward, progressive political scrutiny. Key stories include Sharon Graham re-elected as Unite General Secretary, signalling strengthened Labour movement momentum. Nigel Farage faced renewed parliamentary standard scrutiny if he wins Clacton. I don't know. He may well have won Clacton. I'm unsure. I know that he was standing again because he had resigned, if you remember. So, and if you remember, his opponent is Count Binface. So it would, on the face side of it, Farage would be losing face if he lost to Count Binface. So I'm not sure. Well, we'll no doubt find out. Amnesty International warning that Reform UK's proposed welfare cuts breach human rights commitments. These stories focus on accountability and political positioning outside mainstream framing. Now, I had heard that as part of Reform's push to get elevated in the polls again, that they have decided that they would like to cut the PIP award, which is Personal Independent Payment Award, for anybody who's working. Now, if you're not familiar with PIP, Personal Independent Payment is something that is made to people who have documented diagnosed disabilities, and it's in order to support them while they live their lives. And when you receive personal independent payment, you don't have to, it's not part of the criteria that your earnings are taken into consideration at all. So you can work, and if you're a disabled person, you're encouraged, if you're able to work. However, PIP will still be awarded to you if you work, due to the nature of the disability that you have, which means that if you're working and you still find life very difficult, then for a lot of people who are receiving personal independent payment, that's a lifeline that Reform would like to take away. So I don't know who they're trying to appeal to when it comes to this, but I think that it's something that will backfire, and it's something that will come back and bite them on the backside. And I haven't looked at Farage's backside, but a lot has bitten on his bum over a short period of time, so there might not be much of it left. Okay, point 3, open democracy, investigations into power, policy, and inequality. Major investigations this week: Palantir's UK tax minimisation enabled by Blair-era loophole. Well, that doesn't surprise me. You know my thoughts on Palantir. Shouldn't have their sticky, dirty fingers in anything to do with UK. Anything. Rising Islamophobia reflected in mosque attacks and media controversies. Oh, it's awful. Why can't we all just get along? Immigration lessons from Certa, highlighting failures in European border policy. These pieces emphasise structural issues and underreported social dynamics. Okay, so that was from Open Democracy. From the Canary, critical analysis of UK politics and policing. Recent analysis includes calls to criminalise Britain's West Bank settlement trade. Yes. The West Bank, the problems in the West Bank, and there are, from what I can remember, there are UK charities that have been supporting the occupation of the West Bank, and as far as I'm aware, they're under investigation for that. Expanding use of Palantir technologies by UK police forces shouldn't be allowed. Get their dirty fingers out of our stuff. Farage's Clacton win framed as a distraction benefiting entrenched power. So there you go, Farage did win in Clacton. Oh, poor Count Binface. Never mind. Claims of UK government cover-ups regarding Israeli spy firm interference in Scottish elections. We're currently doing Research Hub videos on a Wednesday about Israeli influence in UK politics. So if you haven't been over and looked at the Wednesday Research Hub, well worth a look. These stories foreground civil liberties, surveillance, and geopolitical entanglement. Point 5, In View is an independent reporting on finance, crime, and politics. And their key developments: UK inflation projected to rise to 2.9%, driven by energy costs amid Iran war fallout. Yes, because it's still going on, isn't it, in Iran? And Iran have, again, closed the Strait of Hormuz because the USA and Israel really don't know when they're beaten. Reopened probe into Nigel Farage's 5 million crypto billionaire gift following his Clacton by-election win. So the controversy about Farage's finances is continuing. Counter-terror police investigation links between an Anne Widdecombe murder suspect and a prior arson attack at Farage's home. Oh, that's interesting. So that is suggesting that the same possibly person or group of people are responsible for both of those. So I'm sure we'll find out more as that develops. So these stories highlight economic pressure and political security intersections. Okay, so what these outlets collectively reveal. So across the alternative media, the dominant themes this week: political accountability, so that's the Farage Reform UK welfare concerns; surveillance and policing, so Palantir's expanding role; social tensions, the Islamophobia and the geopolitical rhetoric; economic strain, inflation forecast ties to global conflict; and government transparency issues, alleged election interference cover-ups. Okay. And just as an aside, Copilot says these perspectives differ sharply from mainstream narratives by foregrounding structural power, civil liberties, and underreporting political dynamics. That's why we ask for alternative media sources and not mainstream media. Okay, so that's it from Copilot. Now we'll ask Claude the same question. So here's a roundup of the top UK news stories from the past week according to Claude. And Claude, the same as Copilot, has the death of Jason Arday at the top. So the death of Jason Arday and media pile-ons. Academic Jason Arday was found dead at his home in South London on the 14th of August, 3 weeks into a public shaming campaign following plagiarism allegations against his memoir first reported in late July. Between the 24th of July and the 14th of August, the British press published 249 articles about Arday, most after he'd already resigned from his post at Cambridge. Novara Media pushed a self-critical piece reflecting on how often outlets sceptical of the mainstream got swept into the same news cycle. So unlike the reporting on Copilot, Novara Media have published a self-critical piece. So on Copilot, it said that it's down to institutions that didn't support him, whereas Novara Media have suggested that possibly it's maybe 6 of one, half a dozen of the other, and that the alternative media may well have got swept up in what the mainstream would prefer us to kind of look at. So yeah, again, tragic, absolutely tragic that he wasn't supported enough to not lose his life. The Canaries banking crisis continues. I've brought this to you quite a few times now. Left-wing outlet The Canary remains locked out of its Lloyds Bank account after being debanked without explanation earlier this year. A story that's continued playing out through August, with other independent outlets, Declassified UK and Double Down News, publicly rallying in solidarity, framing it as a wider pattern of financial pressure being used to suppress anti-establishment media. Now, I've said that. I've said before that the mainstream and politicians have all tried to badmouth the researchers. They've tried to drag down the journalists, and they've tried to say that these outlets are no good and you shouldn't pay any attention. And it hasn't worked. It hasn't worked because the Canary has got a massive following. And so do Double Down News, so do Declassified UK, because they speak the truth. And our government can't have that. Our government can't have that. The only way they could shut them up was to take their finances away from them. It was their only option they had left to silence them. Well, it's backfired because all the major outlets, all the major alternative media outlets are rallying behind them. And good on them. Solidarity, it's key at a time like this when they're under so much pressure that we have solidarity. Politics under PM Andy Burnham. What's he been up to this week, I wonder? Several stories track the new Burnham government's early moves, tightening rules on early prison releases, a devolution revolution funding plan, and Andy Burnham chairing Cobra meetings over wildfires. A recent poll reported by Novara Media found Labour has overtaken Reform UK, suggesting the party is winning back voters who'd left after Keir Starmer's tenure. Now, I don't think it's sustainable. I don't think that his performance is sustainable. I've seen quite a lot in alternative media over the week about Andy Burnham, and the general feeling is that people are willing to give him a go. But because the policies that were put in place under Starmer's dictatorial regime are not being amended, not being looked at, not being moved, not being changed, most people don't believe in him. unless he starts to address citizens' genuine concerns over the policies that are already in place, he's not going anywhere. He's not going anywhere. But when you think about a general election and you really think that the only alternative would be reform, it's which bad apple would you prefer? And that's awful when it comes to politics. That's awful. You vote for them because they're the less bad of the bunch. Terrible. Palestine Action sentencing. 5 Palestine Action activists face being sentenced as terrorists after spraying red paint and cracking windows at a Barclays branch in protest of the bank's links to an Israeli weapons manufacturer, despite not having been convicted on terrorism charges. Because they have successfully overthrown the High Court judgment that the proscription of Palestine Action was unlawful, the government managed to overthrow that. So now anybody who does anything in Palestine Action's name can be sentenced as a terrorist. And when it comes to the actual courts and the charging and going through the court system, the juries are not told that at sentencing they will be sentenced as terrorists. So when you look at the amount of problems we have with the grooming gangs and the people who've been put in prison for rape, and their sentences are so very light, and then you look at a group of activists who are incensed, and rightly so, incensed by the maniac genocidal behavior in Palestine, if you want to rub the public up the wrong way, that is the way to do it, because the public do not like what's happening in Palestine. They don't. And the government will lose favour over it. Anti-migrant protests in Thetford. Novara Media's live coverage flagged asylum seekers being forced to flee ongoing anti-migrant protests in Thetford, Norfolk, as part of wider unrest around asylum accommodation this summer. People are fed up. People are fed up. We have UK citizens who are homeless. They're living on the streets, and they're generally, citizens are annoyed that people can come to our country and get put up in a hotel. And we knew that this was going to escalate. We knew that the tensions were rising, and this is now the problem we have. Climate heat context. Here we go again. Independent coverage has also focused heavily on this summer's record heat waves and drought conditions, with warnings that food shortages could hit Britain as a result. Yeah, that will be the next thing. The food prices have gone up. We've had to put the food prices up because we've got shortages. It's been raining up here in the northeast. It's been raining for the whole week. It's been raining. We had quite a nice sunny week last week, and it's been intense rain since. And just as I predicted, we're now into what we would class as usual summer weather for the UK. So I'm not sure whether it's been raining all over the UK, possibly not. But yeah, we didn't get hit with any drought things. We didn't get hit with any heat wave things. Not really in the northeast. A tough lot in the northeast. Okay, a caveat worth flagging, says Claude. Novara Media and the Canary are both openly left-wing campaign outlets rather than neutral wire services, useful for perspectives underrepresented in the mainstream, but worth reading alongside other sources for balance. Okay, thank you very much, Claude. Now we'll go to Grok and we'll ask Grok the same question. So here are the top UK news stories from roughly the past 7 days from Grok, and he at the top again has put the death of Cambridge academic Jason Arday and the ensuing media ethics row. So Grok usually goes into a little bit more detail when it comes to his coverage. Say his, could be a she. No, I doubt it though. Jason Arday was 41, a former Cambridge sociology of education professor who had resigned amid plagiarism and biographical claims scrutiny, and he was found dead. The story originated largely from independent Substack reporting, notably academic Nathan Koffness, and spread via non-legacy channels before wider pickup. Byline Times and related independent reporting framed it as involving a coordinated race science network with ties to Cambridge and figures linked to Peter Thiel. They highlighted cumulative press coverage and called out what they saw as cruelty and harassment. So they're falling on the side of the media coverage of this situation has caused problems for Mr. Arday and could then therefore be linked to his tragic death. Counter views, including some independent and Substack commentary, argued the underlying issues, the alleged plagiarism, the unverified personal claims, prior legal threats against journalists, were legitimate public interest matters, and that calls for quotas, police involvement, or stronger regulation risked press freedom. IPSO received a high volume of complaints. Debates continue on X and independent platforms about accuracy, cumulative harm, and self-regulation. So it's an ongoing debate. It's ongoing as to whether the institutions are at fault or whether the media coverage and the blow up on the media is at fault. So we'll find out more. And if you think from a health and well-being point of view, it must be really damaging. Obviously it's damaging, like he lost his life, but it's very, very damaging when somebody gets hold of a story and doesn't know all the facts. And we don't know what the facts of the situation are completely, but there's a tendency in any coverage to not support the person that is under scrutiny and to also blow out of proportion some of the claims that were made. So it could be, like I said, 6 of one, half a dozen of the other. Okay, point 2 for Grok. Andy Burnham's earlier premiership and policy moves. No policy moves. Burnham, who became MP after the Labour leadership transition, has been active on domestic priorities. Push to end rough sleeping by Christmas with additional funding and calls for wider societal involvement. Now, this makes me laugh because this is what he's shouting to the rooftops about. He shouted to the rooftops about it in Manchester and couldn't get it done. He couldn't get it done. So how he thinks he's going to end rough sleeping by Christmas this year, I just don't understand. I don't get it, because his track record isn't very good on doing it. Adjustments to inheritance tax plans affecting farms, threshold raised. Now, we've had this before. We've talked about the farmers and the fact that there was no inheritance tax for farmers. So they could then pass on their farm to a family member and it would be kept as a traditional family farm. And then all of a sudden we had inheritance tax imposed upon them. And there were, I won't say riots because there weren't riots, but there were demonstrations, very loud demonstrations where the farmers brought their tractors and they quagmired London for a period of time in argument over it, and rightly so. I think rightly so. And there was some movement on that, and the threshold had been raised a little, but raising a threshold is no good when a threshold didn't exist in the first place. As far as I'm aware, I could be wrong on that because it's not something I've looked into. But I would suggest that just raising a threshold isn't good enough in their eyes, and I don't blame them. Broader cost of living and devolution themes, plus economic power shifts towards number 10. Independent coverage, the lead and related progressive outlets, has mixed analysis of the Burnham bounce versus limited mandate questions. Guido Fawkes and right-leaning independents have tracked personnel moves, secondments, and early gaffes and scandals. So independent coverage is definitely on him. And we discussed Burnham's bounce. I suggested that possibly Burnham's bounce looked more bouncy because reform had fallen so dramatically. So we'll see. We'll watch it. Now, I knew this would come up. Russia-UK tensions over drones and Ukraine support. I've talked about poking the bear when it comes to Russia. A lovely bear. I mean, everything that I've heard about Russia is that it's a spectacular country to visit. Their infrastructure is fabulous. Their architecture is amazing, and culturally, what a wonderful place. Why we can't get along, and if we don't get along, why we can't just leave them alone, I don't know. However, Russia have issued threats linked to British-made or British-supported drones used in Ukrainian strikes, including deeper into Russian territory. Burnham has publicly reaffirmed support for Ukraine. Independent and specialist security commentary has discussed grey zone risks and deterrence. I don't agree with supporting Ukraine. I don't agree with war. Full stop, I don't agree with war. However, there is a history to what has happened between Russia and Ukraine. And that history comes down to Ukraine wanting to become a member of NATO and NATO agreeing not to encroach upon Russia any further than they already had. And if Ukraine becomes a member of NATO, then that is an encroachment upon Russia that Russia will not accept. And NATO knows it. So the war, as it stands at the moment, is Russia effectively saying, stop encroaching into our territory. It's a roundabout way of saying it. And right at the very beginning of the war, Ukraine had quite an agreeable deal on the table with Russia. And our bozo, Johnson, decided to go over and whisper in Zelensky's ear that he shouldn't accept that incredibly good deal that was on the table. And since then, Europe has got involved. The whole of Europe and the UK demonize Russia. And it's because they won't toe the line. They don't give to pressures. And people who would love to be powerful don't like that. So us poking the bear, us poking the Russian bear by supporting Ukraine and sending over British-made, British-supported drones is poking the bear. It just beggars belief. It really does. I don't think Russia's concerned about us at all. They must take one look at our political situation and laugh into their soup. Nigel Farage, Reform UK, Clacton by-election and internal pressures. Farage won the Clacton by-election, triggered after his resignation amid financial standards scrutiny. Major parties largely stood aside, leaving novelty candidates such as Count Binface. Independent reporting, The Lead and others noted the win, but highlighted slipping national poll support for reform even, internal frictions, and ongoing questions about associates and donations. They are being investigated and the investigation is ongoing. And I said last week that I think this is why Rupert Lowe has approached reform and said we should band together, because neither of them are doing particularly well, or as well as they'd hoped. So I think that Rupert Lowe would like to band them together to basically get the numbers so that they could then get into a position of power. But they're all Zionists. Okay, other notable items circulating in independent local alternative spaces. Shoreham by Sea drowning. Oh, 3 members of a British Palestinian family died after getting into difficulty in water. A young relative was critically injured. It was covered in local and secondary reporting. Oh, that's tragic. Absolutely tragic. Policing and crime. Met Police highlighted a high stop and search find rate for weapons and drugs. Meta smart glasses banned in courts across England, Wales and Scotland due to recording restrictions, rightly so, and ongoing independent scrutiny of far-right activity, e.g. Searchlight magazine coverage of groups and protests and media regulation debates. Okay. So from a health and wellbeing point of view, again this week, nothing that I would dive deeply into to bring any more coverage to you on. It's all, again, very political, with the exception of Jason R. Day being at the top for each of our AI sources. And again, it's not political, but it is from the pressure point of what can happen when somebody's been put under immense pressure by institutions and the media. So from that point of view, it is a health and well-being issue. If you're suffering like that to the point where you take your own life, it's definitely a health and well-being issue. But we'll find out more as that unfolds, I think. But for now, that's the news for this week. Always remember, power to the people, because together we rise.